Hey guys, welcome back to Darian Empire. I'm Darian and this is Witch Baby Wednesdays. Today I want to talk about a subject that I have heard two different stories from, two different points of view, and it's really about psychic protection. Some people, especially in like the more light worker spiritual world, will tell you that it's actually a negative, and people, I definitely think many witches would tell you that it is a must. So I have a perspective from many different viewpoints here, and I would like to talk about that now. I'll also share some of my tips for psychic protection. So if that interests you, keep on watching. Hey guys, again, welcome back to Witch Baby Wednesdays. If you are digging this series, make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I am finally getting back to all of my subscribers again. If you've been watching me for a while, you know that I went witchy in about August, and I lost about 300 subscribers, which isn't that big of a deal. At the time I had like 11,100. I think I actually had 11,111 the day that I posted my video, I'm a witch, and now we're getting back to that. So I did lose, like I said, a couple hundred subscribers. In lieu of that, in lieu of having lost so many subscribers, this means because I'm getting back to that number, of course it's not a number, of course you guys are human beings, and of course it means that I have 300 or so new subscribers. So welcome to the channel. If you don't know me, I have been doing this thing, for about 4 or 5 years now. I have lots and lots and lots of content on YouTube, and I took down about 300 or so videos that I am actually putting back out. I definitely would encourage you to look on my website, darianempire.com, to see what I do. I am a spiritual, basically like a life coach, but I use spirituality and now, of course, witchcraft. I'm also an empath. I'm a leader for empaths. Our group is called #RockinEmpath. So if you're ever interested in following that group, I also do a course for empaths where we talk about psychic protection. It is, for an empath, the most important thing in the world. And for a witch, it's the most important thing in the world. But there's the viewpoint of some people who, you know, some people who are teaching from the vortex. We'll say that. If you are an Apex follower, you know what the vortex is. If you're not, it's basically just people who are high vibe. So let me just get into the nitty gritty of the controversy of psychic protection. So what psychic protection is, first of all, we'll talk about that. Psychic protection is, especially if you are a witch, or especially if you are a new witch. You know, I was, even before I became a witch, my daughter's father committed suicide. And so I was connecting with the other side and terrified of it, like a long time ago. That was almost a decade ago, actually. Can you even believe that? It was 9 years ago in April that he passed away. And so I was always, at least since then, if not before then, I was always very aware of contacting spirits or whatever, and just being terrified of it. Of course I needed to protect myself, and if it didn't feel good to do it, I didn't do it. Like, here's the thing, is the law of attraction comes into play when you are connecting with anything on the other side, anything beyond the veil, right? So if you open yourself up to connect with spirits or whatever entities, whatever you want to call it, even if you're just like connecting with angels, when you connect with something beyond this physical world, what happens is a lot of people will say that you tend to really open yourself up. I can definitely attest to that, especially as an empath, being so hypersensitive and clairsentient. They say all natural witches, I've said this before, they say all natural witches are empaths, and so anybody that's watching this video is probably privy to having these sort of sensitivities and understanding these sensitivities. But you open yourself up to pick up anything. If you are an empath, you're naturally open. A lot of empaths have to really learn about energetic boundaries, which to me is the exact same as psychic protection. So whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter. My rule of thumb as a teacher of both teaching people how to get into the high vibe space and get into the vortex and stay high vibe, and teaching people about the law of attraction and understanding that when you do stay high vibe, you attract high vibe, right? So if you start attracting if you start trying to connect with spirits and you are fearful, then you will attract things that are fearful, right? So that's pretty obvious. But also on top of that, understanding this concept that there is so much more than just this realm, that there are so many other dimensions that we're connecting with that don't necessarily play by those rules or play by our rules. And when you don't understand energy and also being a human, I mean, there's so many factors in it. So my rule of thumb for anyone as a teacher of the law of attraction, but also a teacher for empaths and a spiritual teacher, my rule of thumb is when it comes to protection or boundaries, you do what feels good to you. So here's where the controversy comes in, right? Anybody who is a witch or connecting with spirits or whatever, they're going to tell you to get used to psychically protecting yourself. So what that looks like is imagining a big white bubble around yourself. I have a different way of doing it that I teach in my empath course, but I'm not going to go into that. But something like that. There are crystals that could protect you. There are certain amulets that could protect you, certain like organ that can protect you. There's certain things that can naturally protect you. Even just having something and just setting the intention to being psychically protected. It's kind of like you can do a set it and forget it kind of a thing. But the controversy comes in, so it's like all witches know this, right? Like not just witches, but people who are connecting with other spirits, and just anytime you're connecting with other spirits or you're bringing in goddesses or entities or whatever, you want to protect yourself, right? So witches cast circles. That's a form of psychic protection. I advise all of my empaths to, when you wake up in the morning, before you even walk out your door, before you have a conversation with somebody, even before you hop onto social media, you should be putting up protection. You should be setting the intention to psychically protect yourself. Again, whether you call it energy boundaries or psychic protection, whatever feels good to you. Sometimes saying protection feels better than saying boundary. Sometimes boundary feels a little more loose and not so harsh as protection. And sometimes one feels good and the other doesn't feel good, and vice versa. So the controversy, and it's taken me forever to get to this point, but the controversy is, and I've heard a lot of high vibe spiritual law of attraction type teachers say this, colleagues of mine, people who are actually friends of mine, and I agree with them, but I also want to urge them, if anyone is watching this who has said this before, I also want to urge you guys to give the full story, okay? So what people are saying, and again, I agree with them, it's just not the full story. What they're saying is when you're in a high vibe space and you put up protection, right? And when I say when you're in a high vibe space, I mean you have thought nothing but positive thoughts for like 3 or 4 days straight, to the point where you wake up in the morning just buzzing, and it's like unconditional joy. You're just like, woo, you just feel amazing, right? So when you're in that space of high vibe, you're not, and you've built that momentum, not the kind of thing where like something great happens and then you're just like, you get a high off of it and then you crash. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, you've actually practiced being in the state of a higher vibrational awareness. It's unconditional. You're not leaning on anybody. It totally came from within, and you build up momentum, right? So that's what it means to be in the vortex. It's not just like, you get like high vibe vortex moments that something great happens and you go back there, maybe you orgasm, maybe you something like that. This is different. These are for people that are really practiced in high vibe, built up momentum, just like you practice baseball and you get better at it, you practice high vibe thinking. So when you're in that high vibe state and you start thinking about needing psychic protection because something negative is going to get you, right? When you start thinking like that, it actually lowers your vibration. So when you try to protect yourself from a high vibe state, it almost is as if you're asking for something to need protection from, okay? So I've heard multiple people say, this is the part where I don't agree, because I've heard multiple people in my position, or even people who have a much greater following than me, who are coaching clients. I mean, I'm also coaching clients, and telling them this, that they shouldn't be protecting themselves at all because it actually creates more of it. That is where I wholeheartedly disagree. I absolutely agree that when you are in a high vibe state and you start thinking about needing protection, it actually is, it's kind of counterintuitive. And you don't really need protection. When you are in alignment with your soul, why would your soul need protection? When you're in alignment with your soul, you're only emanating with really the divine truth of everything, right? So that's what you're emanating with. And the divine truth of everything is there's nothing that's ever going to try to attack you. And so there's absolutely no need for protection in that sense, okay? So I totally get that. But what I would like to encourage any of you witches out there, or even people that are just some of my Abe Hicks followers that have been following me for a while, that are just, in the vortex, wanting to just get a different perspective when it comes to psychic protection and energy boundaries. Here's the thing. I mean, there's a couple different points that I want to bring up here. And what I would suggest is, when you are in a high vibe state, not looking at boundaries as a negative, boundaries actually are a really positive and beautiful thing. So one of the things that I teach in my Empath course, it's called How to Rock It as an Empath, just for anybody that is ever interested in signing up for that course. It's not open now, but of course you're more than welcome to message me. I don't know when I'm going to open it. I will soon. But what I teach is separating energy, right? And so boundaries come in separating energy. And what that says when we separated energy, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, I need these boundaries, get away from me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I honor my own space, and I love my space, and my soul, this is my soul's residence, right? And my soul deserves to reside here. And on top of that, I honor you, my brother or sister. I honor you and the space that your soul is to reside in that body and in your aura. And so psychic protection and energy boundaries are not a bad thing. It's when we start looking at them from a place of fear that it creates more things to be fearful of. So boundaries, I would suggest looking at boundaries as a positive thing. One major thing that I really wanted to touch on here that is actually kind of tipping into the subject of the book that I've been writing, kind of just, dabbling and writing for the last, year or so. It's called Magic Happens When Light Meets Dark. I've mentioned it here. Is understanding vibrations and humanity. So it is, and I just urge a lot of my spiritual coaches that have clients and are teaching people about this kind of thing. One, I do have to say that the people who, I don't know for sure, but it seemed as if the people who were saying this don't actually understand energy. Maybe they're empaths, but don't really understand energy on on the level that I understand it, and some other people that really understand even much more than I do, you know? Energy is such a kind of complex thing when it comes to being a human being and understanding energies. There's things going on that people just don't know. And it did seem as if, and I don't know for sure, but it did seem as if the people who said this don't really understand energy and psychic energy and spirits on the level that I guess you could say I understand it, where I'm able to kind of speak on this from a more neutral level. So the thing is that there is the high vibe version of you, and it's beautiful. And no, you don't need protection because you are in alignment with God. I mean, why would you need protection when you're in alignment with God? You know, there's nothing to fear when you're in that space. But it's sorely unrealistic to assume that you would be in that high vibe state all the time. It would be beautiful to be in that high vibe state all the time, but I don't feel personally that as a spiritual coach, it's really responsible for me to tell people that if you just don't try to protect yourself, then you won't need things to protect you from. Yes, I agree with that, but I don't think that as a spiritual coach and as a life coach, or, you know, as somebody that's in the public eye, my colleagues doing things similar to me, it's not the full story. And I don't think that it's really responsible for people to say just that and then leave it at that. And here's why. There are multiple versions of you. There are multiple versions of each of us. And for explaining's sake, let's say there are two very distinct versions of you. There is, we'll call it the lower vibe awareness version of you and the high vibe awareness version of you. You can call that ego and higher self. I don't even know that I would call it that. But the two of these sort of versions of you are not even aware of the other. So what that means is, when I'm in a very, very low vibe space, I am limited in my knowledge, I'm limited in my understanding, and I can't even relate with the high vibe version of myself. I don't understand her. I don't know how she got to where she is. There's such a disconnect. And I definitely would suggest that anybody notice these parts of these versions of you. When you're in a really, really low vibe state, you almost can't remember what it was like to be happy. And you could be happy 2 days later, ecstatically happy, unconditionally happy, and not remember what it was like to be in that darker energy, right? That's basically because of vibrations. So Abe Hicks explains it in a few different ways. They say it's sort of like being on a disc. So they have the high flying disc and essentially a low flying disc. And nobody that is on the high flying disc is on the low flying disc. Like, it's like turning on the radio. This is another one of their analogies. It's like turning on the radio and putting on, 101 AM and trying to get 95 FM. It's not possible. So when you are in a high vibe state, you think thoughts like, well, if I try to protect myself, that actually is a lower vibrational thing. So me trying to protect I don't need protection. Like, that's what you think. But what you don't realize is that in that high vibe state, you can't even relate to people that are in a negative state. Even if you have the desire to help those people, you can't relate to them. It's just not possible. That's how vibrations work. We're all here sort of on our own vibrational plane. Not sort of, absolutely. We are all here on our own vibrational plane. Some of us are dancing together because we're close enough vibrationally to dance together, and some of us will never, ever, ever meet each other ever in our lifetimes. Ever. And maybe not any lifetimes. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Once we go, I have no clue. But in this body, We have the ability to be many different versions of ourselves. And what I see is those two very distinct, there's many different, but just for explaining's sake, there's these two very different versions of me. And when I'm in a low vibe state, I need psychic protection. When I am in a high vibe state, I don't. There's just not one version of you. And so to me, and I'm very aware of that nowadays, and to me as a psychic, as a spiritual coach and a witch and somebody who is in the public eye and teaching people, and I have clients that are paying me money to help them, I would never just say that you don't need psychic protection. I would never just leave it at that. And I wouldn't, I mean, absolutely, I totally understand why people have said that, why my colleagues have said that, and people who I am friends with and I know and I've worked with in the past. But I would definitely suggest that hopefully if any of you are watching this, that you just tell the full story, you know? So what I would always tell people, as I said, is when you're doing any form of psychic protection or boundaries, just do it when it feels good and do what feels good. Sometimes calling it boundaries feels good. Sometimes being almost tyrannical feels good. It feels empowering when you're in a lower vibe state. And sometimes just setting up really loving boundaries and saying, you know, I really honor you in your space and I honor me in my space. There's also something that I want to point out that I think a lot of people in sort of the light worker world don't really talk about, and that is addiction to other people's high vibe and addiction to conditional high vibe. That is just as ego-minded as lower vibrational sort of like psychic attachments, right? So when you're in a high vibe state and you start feeding off of other people's high vibe states, that's just as bad. Or other people start feeding off of your high vibe states. That's just as bad as people feeding off of you when you're in a low vibrational state and vice versa, right? So it's like any form of attachment when you are a grown adult, to me, doesn't feel healthy. When people have cords attached to you, it just doesn't feel good to me. Whether it's a high vibe cord or a low vibe cord, it's a freaking cord. And it's conditional is what it is. It's not this like unconditional free flowing, I am free, you are free, and let's be free together. It's not that. It's like, I need you for this thing. And we don't talk about that enough, that like in the spiritual world and in the light worker world, that, you know, we get addicted to the high vibe stuff and we don't realize that it's actually an addiction, and we're not fueling, when you're not generating the energy yourself and from yourself alone, you have an attachment. It sucks to say it sucks to be aware of it. It's not something you should beat yourself up for, but you know, an attachment is an attachment. It's ego, whether it's high vibe or low vibe, and that's what people don't really understand. So when I teach my empaths to separate their energy from their loved ones, that is an honoring of the souls. That is, it doesn't matter how good this feels when we're attached to each other. I honor you, and I'm telling Source that Source is the only thing that gets me high. You know what I mean? So, and again, I'm not saying that that's what these people meant when they were, you know, I don't know that, but I just want people to be very, very, very aware of the stories that are being told out there, and it is important to protect yourself. It is always important to protect yourself. But the question comes in that you want to ask yourself from a moment-to-moment basis is, what feels good? What feels good? If you know, saying, oh, I need to protect myself because the world is out there is a terrible world, yeah, you don't want to do that. That doesn't feel good. But if you say, I want to protect myself because I am a queen and this is my realm and I honor the kings and queens around me and I honor the kingdoms that they've created, and you know, this is a beautiful thing, that feels good. And it's really going to depend on where you are, whether you are in that lower vibe state or the high vibe state or anywhere in between. It's really going to depend on you, where you are. When you are in a low vibe state, when you are not protecting yourself, you are absolutely susceptible to some dark shit. I mean that with everything in me. I'm not trying to put anybody in a state of fear, but when you are in a state of fear already, you're not protecting yourself, you are not setting up boundaries, you're not, even just being in a space of like trusting that you're protected, even when you don't put up a boundary, just being in a space of, I know that I'm protected and I can like sit here and cry my eyes out in this space and be protected no matter what. Like that of course would be protection for you. But let's say you sink into a depression. Let's say you're an empath and something terrible happens in your life, and then all of a sudden you're just picking up everybody's bad energy around you. You'll start picking up some demons. I've done it to the point where like, I don't even know who I am. I don't even know who I am. And I can't think straight. And I can't ground myself. Things like that will happen. It is absolutely possible. Now, people who are teaching the high vibe vortex shit, they will tell you, and especially students of A Course in Miracles, they will tell you that the fear is an illusion. That is true. But what they also don't tell you is that just as the fear is an illusion, my body is an illusion. The fear is an illusion, just as this camera is an illusion, just as my face is an illusion, just as every single thing in my life is an illusion. So on some plane, in some existence, this is real, right? This feels real. I'm experiencing this body as if it is real. I'm experiencing this dream as if it's really happening. So for me to say that, yes, the fears are illusions, but they're just as elusive as every single thing I'm seeing. So what that means is I can't write off the fears and the demons that come to me if I'm attracting some dark energy because I'm in a low vibe state. Those are just as real as my physical body, as everything around me. So it's like I can't just dismiss those without dismissing the entire world. So I think that we don't quite get that. I think it's a very controversial thing that a lot of the light worker worlds kind of lean on ignorance, just ignoring everything bad that happens and focusing on the positive. And I agree with that in some instances. I agree that we cannot be consumed by the darkness, but we have to recognize that fears can feel just as real to people as my fingers feel and my hands and everything around me feels in this chair. It's all just as real. So the very last thing I want to say before the battery dies on my camera is, do not ever listen to the advice of someone else over the advice of your own internal guidance. Just because somebody tells you don't protect yourself doesn't mean that you shouldn't protect yourself. You always tune in. You take people's advice just as I've given you my advice. Take my advice, tune into yourself and go, what here feels right to me and what doesn't? You leave the shit that doesn't feel right to you and you take what does, okay? You could come here in your low vibe state and some things could be right to you and some things could be wrong. You could come here in your high vibe state and it could be completely opposite. So, and it depends on where I'm at right now. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not like super high vibe or super low vibe. So it really depends on your awareness in the moment. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Definitely share this with all of your witch friends and anybody else that's in the spiritual realm or starting to get into anything that has to do with meditation, spirituality. This is definitely something that's important. And any of you empaths, of course. Pass this along. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to connect with me outside of YouTube, head on over to my Instagram to say hello, watch behind the scenes stuff, and check out any special announcements that I might have going on. Now, if you haven't already, head over and watch one of these awesome videos and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on the next video, guys.
Trace of the